credit is due. A telephone sometimes does things that we cannot replicate, we can't do on an application. Does anyone know what that is? What's the one thing that an IP phone can do that an application can't do? You're talking on the phone to someone and they piss you off. Slamming the phone down. That's exactly right. That's something that you can't do on a 3CX application. There's only so much you can do with a finger, okay? You can't do it. You have to use the telephone at that point. So a lot of people are fans of a particular brand. Some people might like Yearling, some people might like Fanville, some Snom, whatever. The 3CX supported IP phones have been fully tested by 3CX and the vendor themselves. They do provide us with the templates they need in order to provision them. We just verify them. They provide the current firmware as well. Now, you might go onto the site of 3CX to get the current firmware, and it might be 1 or 2 versions behind what is on their website. They basically create the firmware and release it. They don't really test it as much as we do, because we need to test it based on our system, our updates, and so on. Milos, you will basically see that I am not the most serious person out there. Yes, it is. That is actually Bluetooth enabled as well. So I can get to listen to my tunes on the bike as well. Now, having a supported phone with all the necessary firmware, all the necessary templates out of the box, it allows us to very easily provision the phones. Now, I've got 3 telephones here today. I've got a Yearling T57W. I've got a Fanville X6 SU, if I'm not mistaken, and I've got the 785 Snom here as well. Zero touch provisioning. Just plug the thing in and off you go. But we can also do plug and play provisioning, where we can just have the phone coming up to the PBX and we just assign it to a user. Oh, thank you very much, Tony. Thank you, guys. So, listen, I've got you here for 2 hours. I might as well make it a bit enjoyable. I might as well make a fool of myself. So, provisioning of phones, they can be in the same network as the PBX, but they can also be remote. Now, today we're going to be doing it remotely. We're going to see that the PBX is hosted by 3CX somewhere in Frankfurt, wherever it is. The phones are here in Cyprus, in basically the sticks of Cyprus. I am literally in the sticks right now. If you want to see what things are like outside, it is literally just fields outside and a mess. Yeah, I didn't really want to show my messy office. Is there a way to have multiple analog handsets working on 3CX? Craig, of course there is. FXS gateways. You can connect a little FA. Give me a second. Let me just get that for you. I'm at home now. I've got lots of props. Little ATA device, okay? Now, this is not one of our supported devices, but to be honest, I could get this to work very easily, okay? You basically connect it onto the network and you've got 2 analog devices. I can connect a fax, for example, or I can connect a telephone for that. Yep. There is also, for example, Grandstream has 48 ports. So you can basically, if you go to a hotel, for example, and they say, well, listen, we've got older telephones. We don't really want to do a rewiring. It's a listed site. And we can't afford to change all the phones at once. Can we just use the analog phones? Yes, of course you can. Just connect that little, for us, all we see basically is that SIP connection to the FXS device, the ATA, and you just do the conversion. Yeah. Something with more ports in a standard. Yeah. Listen, I've just shown you one of the basic ones, 2 ports, but you can have up to 48. And if I'm not mistaken, Patton has also created a 128 port one, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, there's go crazy. Now, not everything will be supported by 3CX. Doesn't mean you can't make it work. Okay, you can literally make any SIP compliant device connect onto 3CX. Sorry, just okay. You're very welcome. Right, so we always want a secure connection back to the PBX, okay? That's why we utilize the session border controller. We're going to talk about the session border controller very shortly. But if you don't have an SBC on site, which is what we acronym it for, you can put a router phone. Now, this particular device that I've got right over here is considered to be a router device. It's one of the more modern Yealink devices. It has increased processing power, and you can use this to establish that secure connection back to 3CX. And all the other phones in this network will now connect through this back to the PBX over that. Okay. You don't need to have much to configure. You just need to have the phone's make and model, MAC address. That's all it is. The 3CX session border controller is the definition of you have one job. Its job is to get a remote network connected securely back to the PBX. Now, if you've got a VPN between the PBX and the remote site, you don't need to have an SBC. We're going to talk about that when we talk about the security, but just know that if you've got the big bad internet in between you, just like I've got here from my home office to where the PBX is all the way in Frankfurt, I can have that secure connection. Where's that? There we go. So I can have that secure connection connecting back between that. All right. Now, if I have my, let me just go and delete that. Sorry. Now, if I've got my PBX on this site over here, okay. Sorry, just trying to get comfortable with this. Okay, so I've got a network, I've got a firewall over there. It's connected, and over here we have the PBX. I've got the internet over there, and I've got another site over here. Okay, site B, HQ. No, the slide deck will not be shared. Can you have two router phones? Tim, no, because they don't have the networking capabilities, but we're going to talk about a bit further down that you can have high availability with a dedicated SBC, whether it's a Raspberry Pi or a Linux-based machine. So over here, I've got my little firewall, okay? Over here, I've got my network. I've got my SBC over here. Now, its job is to create that secure tunnel back to the PBX. So it's basically doing this. Okay, that's meant to be a pipeline. And it had a bit of a kink in the pipeline over there, but you've got that secure line, okay? Now, I've got my telephones over here. Okay, 100 and 101. Now, if 100 wants to place a call through to 101, the SIP traffic, okay, so we have the SIP traffic going over here through the tunnel, establishes the connection, the PBX will establish that connection back through, and then come back to this one, okay? That establishes the call. So that's going to go through the tunnel, that's going to go securely through. The RTP, on the other hand, will go locally and stay within the network. This is assuming that you don't have recordings enabled and that you don't have PBX delivers audio. That's essentially telling the PBX you're going to force that audio to go through to the PBX. Okay? These will need to be on the same SBC. Now, if I go and add another SBC into the network, you can have multiple SBCs, you can have multiple router phones if you need to as well. That's not a problem. If you want to have all the phones being router phones, if they have the capabilities, by all means, go and do so. So if I have SBC and I have this telephone connected onto this one, if this telephone wants to talk to this telephone, that will go through the SBC, it will go through the PBX, it will come back and then go to the other device. Okay, so it's going to go back through each relevant SBC. Talk about running features. Couldn't find a clear answer. Raspberry Pi 8 GB running headless CLI audits. Roy, we don't really have updated specs for the Raspberry Pi 5, so 50 would be the gauge for that as well. But yes, they do have more capabilities. I'm not going to commit and give you an answer and saying 100, 200 or whatever, but you would basically have those 50 as the gauge. How many channels? Every call is a simultaneous call from the PBX. So if you've got a 4 simultaneous call subscription, you can only handle 4 calls anyway. Could I repeat how the road of the SBC went up? So if I'm connecting 2 devices on the same SBC, that would essentially go from one device to another directly. Okay, so that would basically do that. But if I want to talk from this device to that device, it's 2 separate SBCs. Okay, the reason why I did that is because to demonstrate. I've got this telephone connected to this one, and these are connected to that one logically. So the way that would go, let me just change the color there a bit. That would go from here through the SBC, will go back through to the PBX, then it would come back, it would go to that SBC and that device. What if you only have one SBC and it's not working connected? What's the effect? No calls. Pretty much, if that's down, your whole network is down. Okay, now, one of the main benefits, my God, that looks like spaghetti junction. No firewall configuration is required at the remote network. So it could be a home network where you have a little ISP's router where you can't do any configuration on it. Doesn't matter. Think of it like the application connecting from anywhere in the world. You don't monitor, you don't configure that network. Exactly the same thing. Essentially, the SBC is this without the fancy interface. And we don't charge for the SBC either. Like old Christmas lights, that's right. Right, so the hardware specifications for the session border controller, we do have the hardware specs on the website. You can do a quick Google search and say 3CX hardware specifications. Let me go and do that for you. 3CX hardware specifications. Copy and paste that. There we go. A Linux machine, for example, a little Intel NUC, a computer, a server, a VM, or a Raspberry Pi can be configured in high availability. Okay, just do a quick search on our website, 3CX SBC high availability. SBC high, I hate this keyboard. Damn, HP keyboards. How does the SBC improve calls when we have low internet speed? Well, the SBC does QoS, so your network will need to honor that and process the calls faster on that. We basically have 2 Raspberry Pis, for example. So you can have 2 Raspberry Pis, okay, Pi 1 and Pi 2, okay, on the same network, okay. This could be, for example, 192.168.0.50, and this one is 192.168.0.60. They're not going to be visible to the telephones, okay? What the telephone will see is a floating IP address, 192.168.0.70. That will be your SBC. So if this is up, they basically communicate with each other, and this one is the primary, and this one is the secondary. If this goes down, this takes over, and it is transparent to the users and the phones. That's essentially what it is. If call recording is enabled, it has to route all the data to the PBX. It will route everything to the PBX. So for small smites, a couple of IP phones, for example, we have Noseberg, connect the phones directly to the PBX. That's exactly right, Keith. That's exactly right. No, this is high availability. The SBC does not contain any information like the PBX. The PBX is in failover. This is high availability. Okay. Now, a big requirement for the session border controller: one network interface, one IP address, one local IP address. It is recommended for it to be static local, but it can be dynamic as well. The phones, if they basically get disconnected or the SBC changes IP address, the phone just need to do a reboot. They see the new IP address, but do put it as a static. It's always recommended. Is there a guide for the high availability setup? Yes, there is. I was just going to copy paste that for you right now. Anything that you request information from 3CX is on Google. Our website is 100% fully Google indexed. So you're asking me, I'm literally Googling it, copy pasting it for you. Okay. What is an SBC? Basically everything that we explained earlier on. It is just a device that establishes a secure connection between a network and the 3CX server anywhere in the cloud. Pretty much exactly right. Yes, border force is what an SBC is. That's exactly right. Listen, I did say I don't have a filter. Now, the 3CX session border controller router phones. They are essentially newer models of phones from our supported vendors, Yealink, Fanville, Snom, that have increased processing capabilities. So we have the capability of giving them the SBC to host through the firmware. It is very important that when you define a router phone, that it is up to date on the firmware, because the ones that they ship with might not have the SBC built in, okay? And you will get blacklisted from the PBX. So this telephone is essentially a router phone. It can make and receive calls, and it can also do the routing as well, dual functionality. You can connect up to 10 telephones behind it, including itself. That's a soft limit, okay? It's not a hard limit. It is the recommended limit, so the phone doesn't basically crap itself. You don't need to have any additional hardware. Now, in the office here, I've basically got nothing extra. I'm just going to basically be using this. Yes, the PBX is hosted by 3CX. It could be on-prem on a different network. It doesn't have to be hosted by 3CX. Does 3CX have support chat? No, we do not. Sorry, to add my previous answer regarding the theoretical comments, I've got a project coming up with 120 phones. A high availability cluster of 2 SBCs might not be sufficient. What would your tip be to phones on an on-prem situation? Are all those 120 phones on the same location? What's preventing you from putting the PBX on site? If you're going to have an SBC there, you're going to be utilizing that anyway. Why not just have the SBC on site? The PBX on site. Okay, that's the answer to that one. Listen, the licensing is going to be the same. You're going to have the cost of the hosting, whether it's with us, whether it's with Amazon, Google, whatever. Just buy the server. You're going to buy something to put the SBC on anyway. Just get the do it up. Can 3CX Cloud act as a backup PBX? Yes, it can. It's a bit fiddly with how you're going to configure that, and that could be a bit of a double-edged sword, however, Axel, okay? If you've got, for example, we're not a bit off topic now with that. We do have a bit of time. But if you've got, for example, your cloud PBX and your on-prem PBX being the primary one, the one that is active, you've got an internet connection in between. If your internet connection gets cut off, your telephones are not going to suffer. That's going to take over. So all the incoming calls to your SIP are going to go to that one, but your devices are still going to see that PBX as their PBX. So you're going to have a disconnect. It's best to have them on the same network, for example. Also installed with one of them as a failover like the Pis. No, they don't have the networking capabilities. Okay, it's essentially just a very it's just a terminal device with just a few extra capabilities. It hasn't got an operating system to do that intelligence of the routing. Does the router phone you have one and it goes offline, then it stops the other ones from working? Keith, yes, it does. But with the dedicated SBC, you can have a high availability, so the other one takes over transparently to the devices. But there's nothing stopping you from having all 10 of your devices being a router phone. You can have them all being router phones if you need to. Nothing is preventing you from doing so. So the SBC is only routing the phone itself if you're under. Well, it is routing for itself, and it is also routing other devices through that. So what you've essentially got is this telephone establishing the tunnel to the PBX. Okay, and you've got 1, 2, 3 devices. They're going to tunnel through that. They're going to go through that telephone. So the load on this telephone is going to be a bit more than what a normal telephone would sustain. Keep it simple, that's right. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier on that to provision a telephone, you only need to have its phone's make and model, its MAC address, you put it into the PBX and then plug the device in for zero touch provisioning. You just basically put the telephone in and it goes and provisions. What's the magic that happens behind that? Well, it's not actually magic. It is infrastructure that is already in place. So, sorry, there we go. So, you basically bind the MAC address to the provisioning URL. Now, what we do is we say, okay, you're trying to provision a device, a Yearling T57W with this MAC address. What we're going to do is we say, okay, you've selected Yearling T57W, so we're going to contact the Yearling RPS, Remote Provisioning Services, or Remote Provisioning Server. That's essentially just a fleet management of Yearling. Every IP phone vendor has one. For example, and they might call it with different acronyms. Snom, for example, calls it SRAPS. Okay, don't know what the acronym means off the top of my head, but it is still the same thing. So what we do is we send the MAC address and the provisioning URL. That is stored for a period of 2 weeks. Okay. It is also going to be there for 2 weeks until something goes and connects. Now, if I go and connect a telephone onto that RPS, onto the PBX, it will remove it. So it's up to 2 weeks. Previously, with version 18, version 16 and whatnot, when we had the RPS, if you wanted to delete it before the 2 weeks, you would need to contact technical support for that. You no longer need to do that. Just either delete the phone from the user, or once it is provisioned, it gets deleted from there. And you can reassign it to another PBX if you need to. So for small sites, better to connect the IP phones directly and have no SBC or router phone. No, you need to have at least one router device, because connecting them directly is unsecure and it is going to cause you issues, because you will need to do port forwarding at the remote site. Don't use Stun. Depend on the small site, not all phones can be router phones. If there's only one available, can this handle 10 devices as far as I know? Yep, that's exactly right. But you can make them all router phones, yeah, if it is compatible. That's correct, yeah. Now, this telephone, factory fresh, just out of the box. The first thing you will need to do is make sure that the firmware is up to date. That's a manual process. Yes, it is a bit inconvenient, but it will help you along the way. Once the telephone is on the proper firmware, it will be able to connect as an SBC. So I connect it on. The first thing that the phone is going to do is get an IP address from DHCP. It is going to send the multicast request in the network saying, hi, I'm a T57W. Can anyone hear me? Well, there is no other device on the network, so it's not going to do it. So what happens now is that it is configured and programmed out of the box to phone home. It's going to go back to the mothership. So it's going to go back to the RPS and say, do you have a URL for me? The RPS will send the URL to the device, the provisioning URL of the PBX. That telephone, through the powers of DNS, now knows exactly where to go. So it is going to go back to the PBX and say, do you have a config file for me? That contains all the necessary settings and credentials that the phone needs to register onto the PBX. So that gets its config. It now knows exactly what it needs to do. It goes and registers. Okay. Now, a lot of people don't like sending this information to the RPS server. They want to have a bit more control over their information. They use option 66 for DHCP. You can disable the RPS provisioning if you want to, okay? But we can also do it with plug and play as well. Plug and play, basically, we're going to see that in the demonstration as well. Could the 3CX app scan the MAC address of the IP phone? Generally, no, but you can, for example, get the invoice of your devices. Vendor would send it by PDF, for example, just copy paste it in. Okay, so we're going to go demonstrate that now. We are going to go and configure the first phone to be a router phone. I'm going to connect the two other devices through that. And then we're going to upgrade the firmware of the Yearling device because I did downgrade it before we started the webinar. And let's go share that screen now. Example, 50 IP phones on one site, one cloud PBX, but not on-prem. What's the best and secure option to follow? Just put an SBC on site. Intel NUC, computer VM, that is up to spec based on the specs that I gave you earlier on. The SBCs are in there as well. And connect them on. And if you're using, for example, a Raspberry Pi, you've got two of them, put them in high availability. One goes down, the other one takes over. Really, really simple. You don't need to overthink this. Right, so let's go and configure our phones. Now, I already do have my user up and running, okay? So Nicholas, if I try to use this person to call 101, microphone not found. That's logical because I don't have a microphone on this machine. I'm going to go and configure my phone over here. So going to IP phone of the user, configure a phone, T57W. What's the MAC address of it? Okay, that's the MAC address of the phone. Click on next, connect directly. It will be connected directly onto the PBX. It's not connecting through another device. There is no existing SBC or router phone, and we're not connecting locally. So we are going to connect directly to that. Add the phone. Restart your phone. Now, before we click on save, we can see the various settings of the phone. Okay, so the interface language, the date format, whether you want to choose blind or attended transfer when you press the BLF button to send the phone through, the call through. Power LED. Do you want it for voicemail and missed calls, for voicemails, for missed calls or no power LED options? The time format, what time zone the phone's in. So the PBX might be in Cyprus, but the telephone itself might be in Sydney. So I could say this telephone is in Sydney. Okay. Even though my normal extension is in Cyprus, so I might have another device that is in Cyprus, but this particular telephone is on my extension and it's in Sydney, so it's +10. Okay, so all the codecs that you're going to be using in the order of preference, VLAN options, customizing the ringtones. If I want to change the ringtones, for example, everything is there. Click on save. That will create the template, and that is what's going to go and be sent to the phone. I do miss the old style of version 18. If an SBC was that, you can instantly see new connected phones and assign them. Yes, it is there because we tidied things up a bit. What's the disadvantage of connecting all the phones directly? Now, since I've created this as a router phone, it is also created as an entry in the voice and chat. The only disadvantage of creating all your phones as router phones is that this will fill up very quickly. You're just going to have a page full of these. But to make it easier for you, you can rename it as well. Okay, so it doesn't have to be just the model and the extension number. Let me reset that device. Okay, I'm going to go and create a new user now for the other device. Add the user. I'm going to call this one Nicholas Fanville and Nicholas Snom. Okay. Right, so let me reset those phones when that phone comes up. Now, I've configured 3 telephones onto 3 users, 1 telephone. If I go into System and Updates now, I will see that it's giving me a firmware update. Okay, so I can download that. If I leave it to its own accord, it will download it within a few minutes. I'm going to go very quickly and configure Nicholas Fanville. IP phone, configure a phone. Seriously, I haven't got the MAC addresses for these ones. Old school. Okay. Menu, status, phone, 0 Charlie 3 Echo 3 Delta B1 D5. I'm not writing Apple. Sorry. Oh, actually put it in here. Okay, so cool. At least I've got it there and put it in here. Okay, so that is the X6U. Next. Okay, connected through the touchscreen phone on Nicholas's desk. Okay, save it. Now, if I go to my dashboard and I'll go to my event log, I can see that there is an RPS request that has been sent directly to that and successfully as well. So RPS for the Yealink, RPS for the Fanville. I just need to reset this phone as well. Okay. So that is connected through that. It's not a router phone. It is connected through that SBC. So let's go and click on OK. When creating users extensions, can we set the extension number ourselves? Yep, you can. Is it possible to sync 2 different operating? No. The PBX will only connect to one Office 365, but you can have multiple PBXs connecting to the same Office 365. It's just a separate application on the Entra ID. Okay, now coming back to our users now, we can see that the Yealink T57W has connected and it is showing us that there is an upgrade as well. Now, since it is on the same user that I've connected onto this one, I can see that when I open the dialer, it is going to the Yealink T57W.
Please enter personal identification number, then press hash.
And it is the phone that is making the call because I am controlling it now. Okay, I am remote controlling this phone now. Okay, the X6U is now connected onto Nicholas Fanville. And let's reset this phone as well. Okay, so under phones, under plug and play phones, we have the X6U was coming up there as well. So I didn't actually need to put the information in. I could have just got it through this page as well, selected it and just assigned it to the person if I needed to. That's what I'm going to do with the Snom right now. Now, okay, just wait for that to do it. Okay, so that phone is now resetting as well. That's going to send a multicast request. The SBC will pick it up. send it through to the PBX, and you will essentially just have another entry here. We're going to select it and assign it to Nicholas Snob. Once we do that, we're going to go and do the firmware upgrade of the Yealink device. If I go into updates now, I should see that the X6U now has a firmware update as well. Just waiting for the phone to boot up now. Come on, phone. It's a bit slow. Okay, I should be able to start seeing the plug and play phones coming through now. Give it a few more seconds. Can you select a manual firmware version or previous version? The PBX will always give you the current version that it has, okay? But if you do need to do something for whatever reason, under options, you can use untested and unsupported firmware. So that will allow you to upload a firmware to the PBX and then assign that to be used. Okay, that's how you enable and disable the RPS provisioning. Secure device provisioning will create a unique provisioning URL for each of the devices. Okay, if you're using option 66, don't use this. Okay. Automatically clean up and delete unused firmware. So when you do it, once you download a new one, it will delete the older ones. Okay. Rightio. Sorry, when will the Dacia be available? You will have to put that manually in. Okay. The Lidus firmware. I don't know what dirt Lidus has got on Yealink, and Yealink is preventing from putting the Dutch. All the different languages are in there. I don't know what the Dutchies did, but yeah. Which is better, VM, SBC, or a physical one? They both work the same, to be honest, as long as the network